Hi, folks. This is Wang说半岛. Today, my topic is yield is money. And I have divided this talk into two parts. Today, I'm going to present part one. The major topic about this part one is a discussion of yield and classic yield models. This will be my focus today. And I'm going to use TSMC 5 nanometer data to explain what do I mean by classic yield models. As usual, when I present something hardcore, I would like to give you some interesting icebreakers. So I have some interesting icebreaker for you later. Before that, I will give you my outline of my talk. This talk has only two segments. What about yield? Chapter one, and classic models based on Poisson distributions. Okay, the icebreaker is this. If you recall, Samsung Note 7 has a big recall in 2016. What happened is that in August 2nd, they announced that the wonderful Note 7 is on sale. But within a couple of weeks, people find out that battery when bad can burn the whole cell phone, and therefore triggers the whole world requesting recall. Samsung eventually did a recall about 1 month later, and this is a huge loss. They have to return, they have to pretty much give refund to every cell phone sold. On top of that, they already lost their other costs. So Credit Suisse estimated Samsung lost around $17 billion in revenue from this recall. If you treat this issue, my question is this a yield issue? Well, in reality, this is called a reliability issue. A reliability analysis usually has this best-up curve, all right? It's the failure rate on the y-axis. This is your failure rate. And then initially it will be high, and then you drop down, and then you go flat, a very flat plateau. It's a normal live use, low constant failure rate, and then you wear out, and you eventually fail. So this kind of a best-top curve is very common in reliability analysis. It's not exactly a yield issue; it's a reliability issue of a specific product. And we call this type of curve, this type of analysis, we call it a Weibull distribution. It's developed by a Sweden colonel during World War II, Mr. Weibull. And he actually invented this called a specific probability distribution with with a few factors involved: beta, which is the most critical one, and eta and gamma. We're not going to discuss it today, but if you look at this equation, and if you put beta into less than 1.5, you are describing this power curve. This power curve is called infant mortality, meaning that initially it just dropped like a rock, like exponential functions, right? And then the flat portion is described by beta equal to 1. And then the way out life, at the end of life, this portion is described by beta, the shape parameter greater than 1. So one equation, we play with a couple of parameters. You could describe very nicely the best-up curve. That's the wonder of the Weibull distributions. And Note 7, obviously, it failed quickly. Within 1 month, a few weeks, a lot of product fail. About 20 to 30 product fail. It's not like a great number of product fail, just a few products, but that's enough to trigger a recall. This is, we call it the infant mortality. Just like an infant was born and they passed away, right? So this is This is, if you're not careful with product launch, this is what you can see. And I want to give you an interesting icebreaker on the nature, that nature has one of the most famous infant mortality curve, which is the barnacle geese. These geese have a baby. This goose has a baby. This goose mommy has goose baby, and in a few days, she will force the baby to do something crazy. Let's look at it.
A perfect launch and a controlled drop. This is as good a descent as it's possible to make.
This look like a disastrous. The mother goose forced the baby to get off from the cliff. They just jump off the cliff, and this is the nature's most cruel, but seem necessary for barnacle goose to survive. And do you think that the baby goose can survive? In fact, they survived amazingly, right? And so it's like the survival of the fittest. They force the baby to go through the process, and then whoever can survive, then the mother goose can raise them, will raise them. And Samsung case is a case of infant mortality because beta equal to 1. And how industry deal with problem is to do a burn-in. It's just like the mother goose is forcing the baby to jump off the cliff. The burn-in will set a specific time for every device to go through this burning process by running this device in an adequately long period of time, and so as that they will fail. Some of them will fail, and then that's fine because it's still inside the control of the seller or the manufacturer. So once they did that, then they release a product that has a usual lifetime. So, and Samsung, so for a certain reason, they didn't catch it. Right. So this is my icebreaker. Hope you like it. Now let's go back to our own business. This is about the silicon CMOS. My question for you, in this page, I would like to ask you a question. Which one is more valuable, a piece of gold or a silicon wafer? If you look at the a report that look at the price, sale price per chip in 2020, this has been estimated 2 years ago, and you look at the price, a foundry sale price per wafer, right? And then you look at the price and you'll be amazed how expensive a wafer can be sold for. For example, in in 5 nanometer, this sale price of a wafer is around $17,000 per wafer. And then per chip is about $240. Then it costs about $13,000 to make. But if you compare this thing with a piece of gold, let's start with the bare silicon wafer, 300 millimeter silicon wafer, weighs about 140 grams. And it costs about $100. But if you use this 140 gram and calculate the equivalent gold price, a gram is about $60 on the market right now. So times 140 is $8,400 equivalent weight of gold, how much it costs. But if you look at the price, the 5 nanometer is about $17,000, right? That you have to pay in order to buy a good TSMC 5 nanometer wafers. And then you compare it with this cost of gold equivalent in weight, it's obviously 2x. And for 3 nanometer wafer is even worse. The latest news is that going to sell for about $20,000 per wafer, right? And it costs greater than $15,000 to make. So you can see that the importance of yield. If yield is adequately high enough, okay, in the example like greater than 70%, that the customer willing to pay $20,000 for your 3 nanometer wafer, then you are making, like every wafer you are making $5,000. That's almost equivalent to better than printing gold, right? So printing money. So we can see that if your yield is adequately high, you're making money, you're printing money, in fact. Every wafer you come out, you make $5,000. But again, if you have low yield, because remember, you have a cost, you have a cost associated. If yield is low and then nobody want to buy your wafer, it had to be adequately high, by the way. Then you lost $15,000 per wafer, and you are making thousands, millions wafer, in the lifetime of the product. Then you can see how bad it could be. All right. So just give you a flavor of which one's more valuable. A good silicon 5 nanometer or 3 nanometer is definitely more valuable. If you look at TSMC N5 and 7 yield, specifically about these two graphs I'm showing here, they reported that the NVIDIA 10 5 nanometer is about 80% yield. This is the graph. And the maximum die per wafer is about 3,200. Right? And then defect density 1.271, and the yield is 80%. And this number I'm going to use extensively later in my analysis. If you look at the right-hand side, this is the report come out on the analysis that their defect number is very low, and that is beyond world class. If you have defect number like 0.5 per centimeter square, that's a very good metric. Because when you go buy a silicon wafer from a supplier, that's the number they're going to give you, about 1 or less than 1 particle per centimeter square. So that's one thing willing to say, my wafer, my bare wafer, I'm going to sell it to you, has this kind of a spec. And usually the buyer, the foundry will accept that. Right? And as the process go on, you can imagine the defect number should go up. But in reality, they are not. A good factory will make that number lower. And TSMC, they put some interesting numbers. And then is N7 is like 0.09. I put a 0.1 here, right? So this is amazing. So in their process, they have some specific technique that used to make the yield low, to make yield high with defect number lower. And then if you look at the N5, that's even more interesting, because when you have a new technology, N5 should be here. It should have a higher. They should have a higher defect density, right? Because with the new processes, you're introducing something unknown to the flow. Therefore, you don't know what's going to do to you. So usually you will see a higher defect, and then you tweak it. You do some process optimization to bring that number down, just like an N7 in here. But in this case, that's not the case. In this case, N5 starts with a lower number and then N7 by nature. So we're going to discuss why it happens. Besides that, N5 has a better process or something like that. So we're going to talk about that in our talk. Now, if we we use the data and would like to understand. So he's reporting out that the total maximum dies per wafer is about 3,200. So I would like to know what is the die size of this product, the NVIDIA 10. Right. Then I will go and use this website. This website is called a gross, kind of a gross die per wafer formula. This is how it looks when you open the website. Then you say die width. If you use this at 10, and die height is 10, 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. And then the width of the scribe line is a typical value of 100 micron. And then the wafer edge exclusion is that this graph, the edge are incomplete die. They will never be a good die, so you need to remove them. All right. So that's called edge exclusion. Edge exclusions. People use 3 nanometer as a general guidelines. And then this website used this formula to calculate how many dies per wafer. So I calculate. Here, if you have 8-inch wafer, you have 200, about 250. You have about 12-inch wafer, you have 600. So I would like to introduce you this simple website for you to do your own calculations. Okay. In order to capture the number 3250, 3250 is the total die, and I would like to know what is the die size. Then I do some simple iterations. Then you can quickly see that a die width and height with 44 millimeter will give you around 3200. All right. So that's the one close to what we saw on the TSMC report. So TSMC report, the die size, right, is 4.4 millimeter square. Now, if you use that number, 0.4 centimeter, 0.44 centimeter square, that's amount to 0.2 centimeter square, right? Then use that number to estimate what, if you place this number on a yield chart, this is a very famous yield chart, defect limited yield chart. They have multiple lines here by using different models. Poisson, Murphy, Seeds, Einstein, negative polynomial. And it sits right here. These 5 models are developed by various scientists, statisticians, explained based on their model, what does the yield curve look like. And if I plot the TSMC 5 nanometer data here, it's 0.2 centimeter square, then you can easily see that it's right here. And it's, I would say, inside the predicted theoretical limits. Of course, they're very close to this dotted line, right? The seeds. But it's not too far away, it's somewhat 10-20% off with the theoretical line. This means that TSMC, their yield is very close to one of the theoretical limits, at least. So this means that they are pushing the limits, even predicted by theories. So I have a question for you. If you use this graph and estimate TSMC FPGA product, and this product is Xilinx product, is a VP19P, VU19P. They have a super large area of 9 centimeters square by using this plot. Right? And here, this plot, the answer is that it's off the chart. The die size of this graph is up to about 2.5. Right? It doesn't be able to predict if you're 9 is off the chart here. So if your die size is 9 centimeters square, then it is like 0.1 or below. So this means that it's only a one or good dies per wafer if you ask TSMC to make it, all right, to make this product. Say if you use 28 nanometer to manufacture the FPGA. So FPGA is super large die size. And if you look at the cost of 28, so 28 nanometer, the cost of manufacturing is about $2,000 and it will sell you about $3,000. So this means that if you want to buy a FPGA die, say from TSMC or similar foundry, you will pay at least $3,000 for one die. And sometimes, and then TSMC had to make a huge amount of effort to make sure they have a good die, right? So you can see the reason I present to you large die size and all that, because die size is very important when you generate the yield numbers. For example, the question of this page is that what is the impact of 11 killer defects, right? On the right side of this graph, here I have 120 dies, and then I have 11 defects here. And this means that I have 109 good dies. So the yield is 91%. On the same wafer, if my die is like a FPGA, such a large die, here in this case, I have 26 dies, but 11 of them is dead, is killed. I have only 15 left. So my yield immediately will drop to 57. So you can see that even you have the effect of one killer defect is very different if you have with respect to the different number of dies on the wafers. Right? I keep mentioning good die. What does it mean, a good die? A good die is, there are many criteria. Let's focus on a few important ones. All right. A good die meaning many specs. Here you need to make sure you have enough speed, enough low leakage, and then here is a 10-year reliability. And so the speed and leakage is determined by the I on and I off, which you will see from the reports is 1 to 2 milliamp per micron. And the leakage will be 0.1 to 10 nanoamp per micrometer. And so this micron per micrometer, I'll give example here. In a FinFET world, per micrometer means that how many, you need to find out how many fins that you need to generate 1 micron per micrometer. In this technology, like 10 nanometer or 7, the fin height is 40, and the fin width is 6 nanometer. So each fin has the width 40 times 2 plus 6. And then, of course, then you need 12 to come out with equivalent 1 micron in width. So that's what the per micron means. And you can use the same concept for planar devices. That's the same thing, okay? It's just the total of the devices that generate that give you 1 micron per micrometer in the device width. And that the number of devices generates certain current, and that's the number you're gonna see. 1 or 2 milliamp for the I on, and 0.1 to 10 nanometer for I off. I have a question for you. Since this is gonna speed the current related to speed, if a foundry manufacture a 4 gigahertz die, but it cannot make that fast as specified by you, and they say, I only reach 3 gigahertz, will you accept that? This is called bin split. Usually will not be accepted because 3 gigahertz product has its own capacity to handle. So even you generate, say, I'm okay, I'm reasonably good, right? You ask for 4 gigahertz, but I give you 3 gigahertz. and maybe I could give some discount. It doesn't work. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. Does not work in this semiconductor world. So this reasonably good die will become a keychain. They cannot meet the goal of 4 gigahertz. So that's how harsh the requirement is for a foundry to generate a good die. And reliability is a little bit different from what we just said, viable, the one of the info mortality. It has something to do with that too, right? We're going to discuss later on in our future talks. And here it just means that it's meeting your many key KPIs like bias temperature and stability, TDDB, electron migration, and hot channel injection, and all these terms describing the reliability of a die. So you need to meet all of them or more in order to be able to give it to your customers. And TSMC is able to do that, at least claim us 80% or 70% of their die produced. Okay. Let's look at an example of Samsung. When the yield is too low, this year in February 23rd, Samsung lost Qualcomm as a customer because they cannot generate enough yield. The yield is about 35%. And then the Qualcomm demands 70% or higher, and somehow Samsung, due to various issues, cannot generate enough yield. And so, well, you just make more wafers then. So what's the problem, right? You say each die had 35% yield and just make 2 wafers, right? Even there's a cost associated with it, but the customer should be happy, right? No, that's not the case. Customer won't be happy because when they initially assign you a certain number of wafer to be produced at a certain time, you need to deliver those good dies at a certain time. And then if your yield is low, like 35%, and you need to do 2x, then sorry, you will not be able to meet the time required, the time to market required by the customers, right? Because they need to say meet the Christmas sale target. They have to have the die right now, 3 months ahead. And then so, oh, I cannot do that. I have to give me 2 more months because I have to make 2x wafers. That doesn't work, right? That doesn't work in this world. Therefore, Qualcomm has no choice but to send the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 and 1 Plus to TSMC, which is a higher 70% yield, 2x yield. But things got interesting turns last month. TSMC 3 nanometer wafer has crossed $20,000 per wafer mark. So Qualcomm actually has no choice, had to come back to Samsung as a second source because they didn't make sure that there's a backup plan, there's a plan B. The TSMC 3 nanometer has something. And they will use a second source to kind of negotiate with TSMC, hey, can you lower the price a little bit lower because I got second source, even though Samsung has a lower yield. And Samsung is struggling to improve their yield by seeking some consulting company for yield improvement. So there's always a funny twist in this world. Okay. If you look at the yield breakdown by mechanism, there are quite a few. You can see this summary. It's a very nice summary from IBM that there's just so many reasons you could go back. There are random one, there are systematic one. We're going to talk about a lot of that in our next talk. But here I'm just giving you a heads up to what's going on, that your yield could be a functional defect, could be a parametric defect, and each defect has many, many signatures, right? And then and say random variation, the most famous one here is the dopant fluctuation, all right? And then the other one are important as well, but not as important. So polygrain variations no longer exist in the high-k metal gate. We don't use polyacetate, but it's still important on 445. And on top of that, you have the process variation like a lot to lot, wafer to wafer, within wafer, even within dies. So we're gonna see some interesting examples in the next talk. So here I'm just give you a quick summary, a quick heads up that there's so many factors that some of them we don't even know, and that the yield impact real, and the foundry need to deal with each of them, make sure they are not damaging your wafers. Okay. Now I'm going to move to the classic yield model based on Poisson, the second part of this talk. What is a Poisson anyway? Poisson is a name, a French guy that invented this distribution by analyzing a lot of interesting events. I give you a real life example like this. Suppose you are tabulating the hospital emergency rate, right? That patients you received every day, every 24 hours. And you are calculating, you are numbering, you are only telling five, you find out it's average five, very serious. By the way, it is very serious, meaning that it's a rare event. You find out it's kind of constant. You tabulate the incoming patients with various sickness, and you find out it's five per day. So the distribution like this, the average rate is a constant. Events are independent of each other because we see the emergency patient coming in to the emergency room. They are not related to each other. So that's assumptions. And two events cannot occur at the same time. If you use these two hypotheses, these three assumptions, then you will get a so-called Poisson distribution like this. And then I'm going to give you a very simple Poisson distribution calculators for you to practice. So if you go here, this website as a list here, then you put a number here. So average number of success is 5, and the random number is 2, then you calculate. Immediately, the website calculates for you the probability of, say, only 2 not meeting this average 5 rate, your probability, with a formula which I'm going to use later. All these will be provided to you. Eventually, you'll get this curve like this, right? This kind of distribution has been used after it's invented for many events, many cases. I give you one very simple but interesting cases, and I'm going to use that cases to build on that cases to go to the semiconductors. So bear with me. So in World War II, as you know, that the British bombed London extensively. So the question for the U.S. Army is that does the German bomb London? They do it intentionally, focus on selected area, or not, or just randomly? Because if they do, then they will put resources to protect those areas more, right? So, but they don't know how to deal with this problem. So what happened is that one of the scientists, R. Clark, he did this. He divided the area by the number of grids, the whole London area to 576. And then he, of course, he know how many total bombs that's been dropped. And then he also know the drop in area, which area they been dropped inside this grid. So this is a probability come out. All right. This is a probability he figure out and using and then plot it here. So the blue one is the red one is the actuals. And in the blue one is the one predicted by the Poisson ratio, by the Poisson equations, by the Poisson distributions, then you can see that image very well. So what's that mean? That means that actually it is. It is a random event. The Poisson distribution assumes a random. So when German airplane come out to bomb the London, they don't have a specific target in their mind. They just drop it when they are reaching the area, just drop it randomly. So this means that to British military, you don't have to do anything specific. You have to warn the whole city, but you don't have to focus on specific areas because they are random. And then so therefore you could focus on your resources in a better place. Okay, so that's a very famous Poisson distribution examples. And but if you use that to do if you treat that uh, to silicon world, we will do the same thing actually. What I meant is that contaminants and particle that landed on piece of wafer is just like German bombs on London. They are actually similar from the eyes of statistics. Okay, we previously mentioned that the TSMC 5 nanometer is here, 80%. And then if we assume that these are generated by certain defects, certain particles in this case, right? We assume it's random. And the particle, there are many different type of particles, or just some inert particles, some organic materials, some unknown absorbed materials coming from the chambers. And it depends where it sits. If it sits here, sometimes okay, sometimes not. For example, if you have a conducting random particle, you're causing a shock of these two lines. And it's very small, even it's bad, it's bad, but still because it didn't touch the other line, it's still fine. And these are all crazy particles that we don't know where it's coming from, right? All these had to be eliminated or minimized. And we treat this later on by assuming these are all just like London bombs on the London bombs on London, the German bombs on London, and treat. And here we use that analogy to develop our theories. Okay. With this in mind, the ITRS, International Technology Roadmap for Semiconductors, they will have estimated how many defects you could have. Basically, how many defects you could have for every generation. 2005, you could say critical particle, 94.2. Diameter is 40. But if you go down, this nanometer unit, go down to right now, 2 years ago for 14 nanometer, then your critical diameter become very small, 7.1 nanometer. And you're allowed to have maximum 215 particles per wafer. So these two numbers are being calculated in order to have a reasonable yield. So all these are done by this association that work to predict for yield 99%. Right? Of course, this is the best case. You cannot get that in reality, right? So I have a question for you. People find out that the yield of 300 millimeter is always larger than 200 millimeter. So why is that? They find out because in the 200 millimeter CMOS world, silicon CMOS world, the foundry is still using human to transport the wafers from one station to the other. And humans, we have sweat, even though we have a bunny suit. We try to be as careful as we can, but you still had the sodium particle floating in air, right? And that or the unknown particle from our human breath. So these will contaminate your wafer because sodium will go into your wafer and become a mobile ion, and that will create shorts. You don't know what happens, but it happens all the time. That's why we have bunny suit. That's why I have clean rooms. But at 300 millimeter, because there are a lot of automation implemented, this automation without human interactions, then there's no sodium or very low. in a clean room now, particle are reduced significantly as well. So for this 300 millimeter boundaries, the yield are usually much better than 200 millimeter. So that's an interesting fact. Now let's go back to particle landing on wafer. The title says it's also boson. That's how we assume, right? It's just like bombs landing in London. We don't know where it comes from, but we do know one particle landing on a wafer is random, and we roughly know the average number. That's what we're going to predict in the future, right? But we assume it's a constant. And so we now know that the particle distribution will follow this mathematical formula, which is the Poisson distribution with a k value and the mu value, like this. Then the simplest yield model is developed, because what's a yield? Yield is that no defects before time zero. The mu is related to time, okay? And then k is your time zero here. You put k0 equal to 0 here, and then you put it into the formula here. 0 factorial is 1, right? And this is also 1. So you come up with this exponential minus mu. And this mu actually is your d times a. D is your defect density, and a is your critical area that is affected by the defect density. Remember, just give you a quick review. If your A is very small, right? If your A is sitting here, then this defect has no effect, right? If your A is very large, then this defect has an important effect. That's what we keep telling everybody that the size matters. So these all are a function of die area. So this keep that in mind. So this is the most famous and the most rudimental fundamental formula that the first generation of yield analysis predict. This is yield. It's just a simple stat, exponential. Of course, that's not going to fit the real life either, right? So ITRS come out with the different ideas, and then they start to analyze more and come out with this idea. But this idea, we could use this graph to describe it. The defect density, we know, right? It's exponential. That's what we assume here. But the critical area as a function of defect size is like something from saturated. This is also very intuitively correct, because if the defect size, if the critical area is very small, right? The critical area will be very small if defect size is very small. If defect size is very large, say a supersized one, then you're gonna kill that die no matter what, right? So if the defect size here you already kill, and then the larger the defect size is killing the same die, so it's saturated. So these two trends are very different. So the true yield is just the impact. It's just the defect density times the critical yield. The times means that they are independent effects, right? And then you integrate it, which is y. Once you integrate them, then you get this interesting formula, become a negative binomial. So this formula is what been recommended by ITRS. And so it plot like this. So alpha equal to 1, alpha equal to 2, alpha equal to 3. These alpha actually are fitted parameters. You got it from your effect or foundry actual data. And they usually recommend alpha equal to 2. Okay, it's like a small mountain. All right, so this is what being recommended. Of course, you guys say, what about 2.5? It could be. It could be. It just depends on your actual data. But alpha is equal to 2 is kind of common. So let's use that example and calculate the TSMC 5-nanometer yield. As we remember in the previous graph, that TSMC here, we have 80% yield. And then I later calculated the die size using this online calculator. I figure out that in order to have 3200 dies on a 12-inch wafer, you need to have your die roughly about 0.2 centimeter. So with this in mind, I'm going to calculate, using the ITRS negative binomial distribution. What happened to yield rate if the die size changes? That's the question I'm going to ask you, right? And this is die size Apple 13, okay? Well, let's assume that, right? NVIDIA, Apple 13, whatever, right? So let's assume that is 0.44. Then we need to estimate using the first formula we introduced to this one to calculate the D0, right? And then point A, right, equal to exponential minus 0.44 centimeter times 0.44 and times D0. D0 is just the constant that we're going to put into the negative binomial. Then you can see that the D0 is 1.15 centimeters squared. Compared with the what's reported by TSMC of the die of the defect density, 1.271, it's not too far away. There's still a little bit difference. This is because this is statistical constant number. It's not what you observe. It's just a representative number used, okay, in this binomial. So with this 1.15 and alpha equal to 2, put it in. I plot the yield as defect size, the die size, and you can see this distribution, okay? And then the 80% is right here. It's the 0.2 here, okay? So if you ask me, what if I have a new die, which is 1 by 1 centimeter, what the yield would look like based on TSMC 5 nanometer data? And TSMC could use this formula and give you actually, I could only give you 40%. So die is rather large, all right? So that's estimated by the negative binomials, unless they do something crazy, something to improve the yield. But that's what the current process will give you. The process with a 0.2 centimeter squared die size, it gives you 80% yield. But with the die size of 1 centimeter square, then the yield will automatically drop to about 40%, 0.4. So this means that the die, the smaller the die, the bigger the yield. So it has a built-in advantage, right? If you have a smaller die. I'll give you another example is that there's a POI, the piezo on isolator, insulator, RF computers that's using your cell phone. The die size is 1 centimeter by 1 millimeter by 2 millimeters. Then what is the yield? What is expected yield of this then, right? Then you look at this, it's 0.1 times 0.2 is 0.02, right? So it's very, very close here, which means that it's almost 100% yield, all right? In theory, you could reach 99.9% yield. So if you're asked that my wafer has you supply me as 5 defect per wafer, and that's very bad. I don't want it. Can you give me something better number? And you could tell your customer that there's no need, all right, because the die size is so small, right? Your 5 defect per wafer, meaning that your die size is so small, so that defect, even they are all killers, but your yield is so high, it doesn't really matter. Let's calculate how many die can generate in a, say, 300 millimeter, or say, let's do a simple one, the 800 millimeter, the 200 millimeter wafers. So they do a simple calculations. So if I have 1 millimeter to 2 millimeter die size, I calculate. Then the 8-inch wafer is 12,000 dies. So you have 5 particles sitting on that, you kill only 5. They will not impact your yield at all. So that's the beauty of it. Then if you look at the TSMC data again, they say, well, the Zen 2 chiplets this AMD Zen 2 chiplets, the yield is 94%. That's what I reported here, right? Their Zen 2 chiplets, 94%. You can see the reason why they are, because chiplet has a much smaller die. So the yield automatically bumped up. Okay. So that's the reason, and that's the reasons why people are suggesting using chiplet concept to make advanced chips, because they are naturally high yield. So in this talk, I have provided you some interesting facts about the yield that we encounter every day in silicon world with some nice icebreakers. And then I give you the classic yield models based on Poissons, and then using the public TSMC data to predict the yield as a function of die size. Okay, in the next talk, I'm talk about the yield limiters go beyond particles. Particle is just one of them, one of the yield killers. There are many, many more coming up, and we need to discuss that. I will provide that analysis in the next talk.